very privileged to have here A.G. Lafley, who I often think of as what business people would want to be when they grow up. That after graduating from college in the late 1960s, Mr. Lafley had a stint in the U.S. Navy, and then joining Procter & Gamble for a 32-year career, which had every sort of accomplishment one could want, including president and CEO and chairman. And during the last, I think, 10 years of your stint there, the revenues doubled from $39 billion to $79 billion. Is that approximately right?
That's approximately right.
Approximately right, but who's counting? And along the way, has had a reputation for talking about civic responsibility of his corporation, the values within his corporation. And so leadership has been something that you have thought about during your entire career. We are nearing, there's a political connection I'm going to make here, we're nearing the 50th anniversary of Dwight Eisenhower's famous farewell address when he left the presidency, which I think, as a one-time speechwriter myself, was probably the finest example of serious political rhetoric in the United States. You recently gave your version of that, a valedictory on leaving Procter & Gamble, where you talked about the values you had learned in your long career of leadership, of citizenship. Would you give us what you think is the most, sort of distilled and extrapolatable version of that message for corporations beyond yours?
We must have had a leak. Well, I think, as I recall, I tried to distill 32 to 33 years into sort of a handful of principles. And the first one was see things as they are, not as you want them to be, come to grips with reality. And I think in my experience and listening to my predecessors, one of the things that distinguishes optimists and leaders is they come to grips with reality. They see it sooner, they express it more clearly. The second thing is, and this is no surprise, I am first, last, and always customer-centric. I was supposedly had spent 22 years at one of the most successful consumer products companies in the world, and frankly, our biggest problem in 2000 was we were nowhere near close enough to the consumer. And I would suggest the whole discussion or debate about open versus closed systems will be resolved based on what, in the end, the customer wants. So does she or he want, will the open system or the closed system deliver better value? Will it deliver a better experience? Will it deliver the relationship that she wants with her brand and her product and her service? Third thing was, I'm a huge believer in innovation. I know I'm in a very dull, very mundane industry. We do toilet paper and deodorants and feminine hygiene and lots of exciting stuff like that. But what has distinguished us, and when we have been at our best, we have been the innovation leaders in that industry, and we spend over $2 billion a year in innovation. I think we hold 40,000 patents in the US. I think we have 20,000 pending, so it is an innovation business. The fourth thing was everybody's a leader, and I expected, we have a leadership culture, and we have a system that's driven by purpose and values, strategy and principles, and all I did was try to express what I'd learned, where I thought we were, and I didn't think we had made as much progress as a lot of others thought we'd made in the last decade. And so I said there was plenty of things to do in the decade ahead. I think that was it.
And I ask this question with great respect. It would be possible to list all the qualities that you have mentioned in a platitudinous way. We should be close to the customer, we should be innovative. Mm-hmm. Can you give us some specific illustrations of what it took to impose or evoke these values inside the company?
Okay. The objective with a customer is to be so close that you understand, in my case, most of the time, her needs and wants, even the ones that she can't articulate. I was probably 5 years in the company, and we had run some consumer research on laundry detergent packaging, and Tide packaging was rated 4.9 on a 5.0 scale. And I had been out in homes, and I had watched women struggle with our packaging. How do women open a laundry detergent box? None of them use their hands. Why? How much did they spend on the manicure? How much time did they put into the manicure? So they've got screwdrivers and pliers and all kinds of paraphernalia out in their laundry room. And we're getting a 4.9 out of 5 rating, and we think we're making the best package in the laundry detergent industry. And I can go through hundreds of examples like that where I sat and watched a woman in Japan do her morning, skincare ritual. I heard people tell me that something was great, and then it clearly delivered a subpar performance. So there's a big difference between saying you're going to be close to customers. One other thing, not to belabor this point, I now work in private equity. We have 15 companies, and one of the questions I always ask is, who is your customer? Who's your current customer? And you would be astounded by the number of companies that cannot describe clearly who their current customer is. Innovation, the big breakthrough for us in innovation was we were great at patenting. We weren't getting it commercialized. We weren't connecting it to consumers and markets. So we went to an open innovation system. We called it Connect and Develop. 10 or 15 years ago, maybe 10% of our new brands and products were partnered with at least one outside innovation partner. Last year, over half were partnered. And I believe there's no reason why virtually all innovation shouldn't be patented, because fundamentally innovation is about association, it's about connection, it's about combining unlikely things. And I could go on for each one. So yes, it sounds like a platitude, but if you dig and you dig and you dig and you get it under your fingernails and you get into it every day, it's really important.
You mentioned earlier I might have had a leak to some of your utterances inside the company. In fact, we talked about a week or so ago, and something you said then that was fascinating to me is, as you mentioned, you come from an industry which is seen as traditional, stolid. People would assume it to be lower technology than, say, Google or Qualcomm or Motorola or whatever. But you said you thought there were some dangers of complacency coming into this kind of high-tech industry, that you thought, share with the audience what we were discussing a week ago.
Well, I think we were talking about the worst thing that can happen is that you're successful. And the absolute worst thing that can happen is that you're wildly successful, because then you become content, okay? You become complacent. You can become even a bit arrogant, and all of a sudden blind spots develop all around you. And they can be blind spots around your technology. They can be blind spots around your business model. They can be blind spots around your real relationship with your customer. And oftentimes you don't even see the new competitor coming, because they're not an expected competitor. They're coming up from underneath. They're coming from the side. So we've gotten waxed a number of times, okay, in the 33 years I was at P&G by success, by success. And we blew up. We created the disposable baby diaper business with Pampers in the early 60s. I think Google's share of searches is somewhere around 64%. We had a 99% share of that business. When I joined the company, we had an 85% share of that business, okay? And we introduced a new shape diaper technology, and instead of putting it on Pampers, we introduced a new brand called Loves, and what do you think happened? We split the business in two. So we took Pampers and reduced it to a 45 share. We had a 40 share Loves brand, and Kimberly-Clark came right up the center with the next technology, and they, in the US at least, they had the leading baby diaper brand. So I've just seen so many times in so many businesses that you can lose it, because of something you did, because you didn't see something coming, because you didn't have your eyes open, because you became too complacent.
And is there any particular way, suppose you were a dominant search company, how would you apply the logic of what you're saying?
Okay, there is no perfect defense, but I believe the best defense is offense. If you don't create the future, you don't want to leave that to your competitor. Second thing you have to do is attack. You have to be willing to attack yourself, right? What's one of the biggest reasons that you don't attack yourself? You don't attack yourself because the economics aren't as good, and they're never going to be as good. You're going to be dealing with maybe higher capital, for sure lower margins, all of the costs of startup, whatever they are in your industry. So you have to be willing to do that. And then I think the third thing is I'm a huge believer in open innovation. I'm a huge believer in partnerships. We talked a lot about our billion-dollar brand businesses. One of the ones I'm most proud of is not on the list. It's with Clorox, who's a fierce competitor in one industry. and who's a big partner in the wraps and bags industry, another very mundane industry. But we took their Glad brand, which was a few $100 million, invested 3 technologies into it, and it's now well over $1 billion business. And I have to tell you, very few people at P&G wanted to do a partnership with Clorox when the idea was initially raised. So I would say that would be a good place to start.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you about is a big theme of all the presentations so far of the conference has been about learning skills, learning traits that you might naively think are just inborn. People are either leaders or not, they are innovators or not, but we talked about ways you can develop these skills. You've placed a lot of emphasis inside the company on training leadership skills. Tell us more about that, if you would.
Well, I think I may have mentioned, I really don't believe leaders are born. I believe they make a choice to lead. In my own case, I was an accidental CEO. Probably
just a country
the
boy.
clearest. No, I was probably the clearest article written about me was the un-CEO. But sometimes, circumstances, and they can be a cause you care about, they can be something you have passion for, they can be something in your community, wherever, cause you to want to make a difference. And so I believe there's this little spark. Second thing I'm relatively sure of is that there are some leadership tasks, engaging and envisioning. It's part of the responsibility, empowering and enabling, and in the end, getting it done, okay, executing. And we have a fair amount of evidence that we can take new hires, we can take 20-year veterans, and we can put them through 2-day, 3-day, 5-day courses, and we can inspire leadership. We don't have a style we're selling. We want you to be yourself, but we have, probably not unlike what the professor was talking about, we have sort of a set of skills and some basic principles, and I think they work. And I guess the last thing I would say is we're on the ground in 100 countries. We're selling in over 160. We're in probably 25 different industries now. There is no way you can survive in this kind of an industry or world unless you have distributed, networked leadership. Yeah. Command and control are over.
You mentioned the term responsibility in the answer. You gave that, which is another theme which has run through all the presentations so far. We heard from Ted Turner about things that he thought the media needed to do differently and citizens need to do and that civic leader and philanthropists needed to do. We heard from Professor Seligman again about ways to develop the right kind of traits. We heard in the first session about ways in which the Western world needs to shore up various of its traits if it's going to restore its economic fundamentals. This is an audience that is largely, although not exclusively, tech industry people. The tech industry world has been so far still largely in the libertarian phase of its development of thinking, well, we'll just have our innovations and the outside world will take care of it. What message would you give to a tech world audience about responsibilities they have in their products, their own personal lives?
Well, I start small, all right? So I think your first responsibility is to serve a customer, right? I'm a big fan of Peter Drucker, and he said the first purpose of a business is to create a customer and then keep that customer for life. So I think your first responsibility is to really serve your customer. So that means a better value, a better experience, a better product and service. The second thing I believe very strongly is you have a responsibility to your critical stakeholders. One of the things I did, frankly, was put the shareholder, at the bottom of the pyramid, not because the shareholder wasn't important, but if I didn't have it right for the customer, if I didn't have it right with our innovation partners, and I didn't have it right with our employees, we weren't going to deliver for the shareholders. So I just changed the mix. The third thing is you have a responsibility beyond your technology, beyond your business, and that's to the communities in which you work and live. And our responsibility in Mandadeep in India is different from our responsibility in Lagos, Nigeria, is different from our responsibility in Cincinnati, Ohio. And then lastly, I really believe you have a responsibility to the sustainability our planet. And you know, we try to work on our responsibilities in concentric circles. We try to work on them in an integrated way. So we're not fixing technologies and products that are ill-conceived and ill-designed, although we have had to do some of that. And we don't get it right most of the time, but we try to get it right a little more often. And I think those are some of the responsibilities that we have.
We have only 2 minutes left here, so here's a final question. In retrospect, as you think about your business career at Procter & Gamble, what do you think is the worst decision you made and what we can learn from it, and in retrospect, the best decision and what we can learn from it?
I think the best decision was really to refocus on the customer, okay, and just put the customer at the center. And we have the customer in most of our buildings every day, okay, and we're in customer homes, living it and working it. The worst decisions were, I should have divested. You know, you're always slow to, capitalism is about creative destruction. And while you create on the one hand, you have to destroy with the other hand. And I always felt that we were quicker to create than we were to destroy. And I should have divested or gotten rid of businesses that either were non-strategic, non-performing, or just weren't going to fit. And my biggest miss by far is we got the Prilosec switch, we lost the Claritin switch, and I had it in my hand, and I deferred to the individual that was running the healthcare business at the time, and I knew in my tummy that I shouldn't have, but we would have had probably the 2 biggest switches in the last decade if I'd made a good decision there.
Great. Well, with that, thank you very much.